Chapter 11 Eggs and Dairy Nature's Growth Formulas. Despite looking and tasting nothing alike, eggs and milk do have one important thing in common. They both exist to nourish new life. This special responsibility places them in a nutritional gray area. They are beloved, nutrient-rich, versatile, affordable sources of protein and other vital nutrients, making them particularly important foods for vegetarians and those who can't access meat. Yet, they also contain unique molecules engineered specifically to support immature animals of their respective species. And some of these molecules can be problematic for humans. Since dairy products are high in saturated fat and eggs are high in cholesterol, thinking about these foods may conjure up images of coronary arteries slamming shut. The food industry capitalizes on fears of these whole foods by stripping eggs of their yolks, skimming fat off milk, and using what's left over to manufacture expensive processed products like egg beaters and Go-Gurt. Worse still, it's becoming increasingly popular to completely replace these foods with plant-sourced products like Just Egg and oat milk made from grain and legume protein extracts mixed with industrially refined vegetable oils. Manufacturers market these factory-made alternatives by boasting about what they do not contain: saturated fat, cholesterol, and animal protein, which distracts us from the problematic ingredients they do contain: industrially refined vegetable oils, low-quality plant protein extracts, and sugar. In truth, eggs are a nearly perfect food, whereas dairy products, although they are nutritious, have complicated effects on human health and metabolism. The egg, a miracle of nature. A box without hinges, key, or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid. J.R.R. Tolkien, The Hobbit. The egg is an engineering marvel designed to house, defend, and nourish a bird embryo until it is ready to hatch. Whereas a human embryo receives a constant supply of nutrients and oxygen from its mother through the placenta, the bird embryo is physically disconnected from mother hen from day one and must obtain every nutrient required for healthy growth and development from the contents of its egg. During the 3 weeks that it takes for a chicken embryo to mature and hatch, its egg must be strong enough to withstand the weight of a brooding mother hen and protect the embryo from injury and infection, yet be porous enough to allow the developing bird to breathe. The chick embryo feeds on the yolk, where the vast majority of an egg's vital nutrients reside. In fact, since egg yolks must provide all of the ingredients required to build an animal from scratch, they contain every nutrient we need, except for vitamin C, which the chick embryo makes for itself. Eggs are a particularly good source of choline, a fundamental component of cell membranes, and acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter central to learning and memory. If hens are raised on pasture, the fat of their yolks will contain more EPA and DHA, precious PUFAs that can be hard to find in many other foods, as well as more vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin K1, vitamin K2, and vitamin D. However, in comparison to meat, a few of the nutrients in eggs are harder for us to access. The nutrient of most concern is iron. We absorb at most only about 3% of the iron in eggs, whereas we absorb between 10 and 20% of the iron in beef. This is partly because the form of iron found in eggs is non-heme iron, and partly because a mineral-binding protein in the yolk called phosphatin interferes with our access to yolk's iron, and possibly its calcium and magnesium as well. Phosphatin survives cooking and is such a powerful iron magnet that each egg you consume reduces your ability to absorb non-heme iron from other foods in your digestive tract by 7%. It has no effect on heme iron. Whereas egg yolk is plump with nutrients, egg white is a food desert. Egg white serves as a formidable barrier to bacteria, viruses, and fungi, which may sneak into the egg through the thousands of microscopic air holes in its shell and try to infect the baby bird. Would-be invaders find this moat of slick, gelatinous proteins physically difficult to cross, extremely low in most nutrients, and teeming with antibacterial proteins. These defensive molecules include protease inhibitors that block bacteria's ability to digest egg proteins, lysozyme, which dissolves bacterial cell walls, and avidin, a powerful binder of biotin, vitamin B7. Fortunately, these anti-nutrients are largely destroyed by heat, so cooking egg whites increases their protein bioavailability from 65% to 95% and makes biotin easy to absorb. Eggs are also common culprits in food allergies and sensitivities, and the majority of the proteins that cause allergies are located in their whites. We'll explore food allergies and sensitivities in Chapter 19. Nature's most perfect and most dangerous food? Eggs are often described as nature's most perfect food, and they certainly do come close. Were it not for their low iron availability and lack of vitamin C, it would theoretically be possible to thrive on eggs alone. Eggs contain 6 grams of high-quality protein each, so they are an excellent choice for vegetarian diets. They're also extremely low in carbohydrate, less than 1 gram per egg, so they are metabolically safe for people with insulin resistance, and they contain about twice as much fat as protein, an excellent macronutrient ratio for ketogenic diets. And yet, due to their cholesterol content, we are still advised to limit our egg intake, or to eat the least nutritious part of the egg, the white, and throw the most nutritious part, the yolk, away. Where does this advice come from? Out of the frying pan? Anti-cholesterol sentiments began stirring in the early 1960s when the American Heart Association, or AHA, announced that cholesterol in the foods we eat could build up in arteries and cause heart attacks. The science supporting this claim was far from settled. Nevertheless, under the influence of the AHA, the committee responsible for writing the 1977 dietary goals for the United States recommended that Americans reduce cholesterol consumption to about 300 milligrams per day. This, despite acknowledging that there was still controversy surrounding the exact relationship of dietary cholesterol to heart disease. The dietary goals evolved into the U.S. dietary guidelines, which, because eggs contain about 200 milligrams of cholesterol each, singled out the egg as a food to be eyed with suspicion, warning Americans in 1980, moderate your use of eggs. And so it was that for half a century, we were led to believe that the connection between eggs and heart disease was scientifically well established and straightforward. High blood cholesterol causes heart disease. Egg yolks are rich in cholesterol. Therefore, egg yolks cause heart disease. Then, in 2013, the AHA, in conjunction with the American College of Cardiology, or ACC, issued a new guideline abruptly reversing its position, writing, "There is insufficient evidence to determine whether lowering dietary cholesterol reduces LDL-C." LDL is low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, aka bad cholesterol. Following suit, the U.S. Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, DGAC, reversed its position in 2015, writing, available evidence shows no appreciable relationship between consumption of dietary cholesterol and serum cholesterol, consistent with the conclusions of the AHA-ACC report. Cholesterol is not a nutrient of concern for overconsumption. Translation: eggs are innocent. Eat as many as you like. Why the about face? Quite simply, because decades of laboratory studies, animal studies, and human clinical trials could find no clear connection between how much cholesterol people ate, how high their cholesterol levels were, and whether they would develop heart disease. There were even plenty of human clinical trials demonstrating that eating eggs provided heart health benefits. Into the fire. You would think that these official proclamations from both the AHA and the DGAC would have been enough to declare eggs innocent once and for all, but in some circles, it seemed only to fan the flames of the debate, as nutrition epidemiology studies from both sides of the debate have since been hurled back and forth, resulting in headline whiplash and public confusion. 2018. An egg a day may reduce heart disease risk, study finds. Peking University. 2019. Eggs raise the risk for heart disease and death. Northwestern University. 2020. Moderate egg consumption gets the green light. Again, Harvard University. 2021. Eating just half an egg with yolk a day increases death risk 7%. Zhejiang University. Yet, notice that even the pro-egg headlines still advise us to be cautious about how many eggs we eat. For example, the Harvard study just mentioned, which was co-authored by Professor Walter Willett, concluded that moderate egg consumption, up to 1 egg per day, is not associated with cardiovascular disease risk. This conclusion is only somewhat reassuring, as it invites us to worry that eating more than 1 egg per day might still be dangerous. However, a close reading of their paper reveals that eating 1 or more eggs per day was not associated with heart disease risk. The authors had inexplicably placed an arbitrary limit on egg consumption that was not supported by their own work. Despite overwhelming evidence that dietary cholesterol in general, and eggs in particular, are completely safe for your blood cholesterol levels and your heart, the U.S. dietary guidelines continue to recommend that dietary cholesterol consumption be as low as possible without compromising the nutritional adequacy of the diet. The result of these scrambled messages about eggs is that many people still believe eggs are risky, when the truth is, eggs are among the safest, most nutritious foods you can eat. Deeper dive. Understanding cholesterol. We have been taught to think of LDL as bad cholesterol, but your body makes it for a very good reason. LDL itself isn't actually cholesterol. It's a pod made of protein and fat called a lipoprotein particle that carries fat and cholesterol molecules around in your bloodstream. When lipoproteins pick up cargo, they expand. And when they drop off cargo, they shrink. So their size and density are constantly changing. Since cholesterol is denser than fat, pods full of fat are lower in density than pods full of cholesterol. LDL, low-density lipoprotein pods, begin their voyage as very low-density lipoprotein pods, VLDL, in the liver, which loads them up with lots of fat, along with some cholesterol, and ships them out into the bloodstream. VLDL is also considered bad, but standard cholesterol tests usually don't measure it. VLDL's top priority is delivering energy-packed fat molecules to hungry cells throughout the body. As VLDL circulates and loses fat, it gradually becomes smaller and denser until most of what is left inside is cholesterol. At this point, it is called an LDL particle, and its priority becomes cell maintenance. Since cell membranes require cholesterol, wherever existing cells need repair or new cells need to be created, cholesterol will be in high demand. So LDL's job is to supply cholesterol building blocks to construction sites around the body. In your accompanying PDF, you will find an illustration of the cholesterol and fat transportation system. It's common to view cholesterol as nothing more than an unwanted intruder that worms its way into blood vessel walls and causes heart attacks and strokes. So LDL is labeled bad because it delivers cholesterol to cells. High-density lipoprotein particles, or HDL particles, are viewed as good because they remove damaged or discarded cholesterol molecules from cells and return them to the liver. Just as it doesn't make sense to think of saturated fats as bad and unsaturated fats as good, it doesn't make sense to think of LDL and VLDL as bad and HDL as good. We need all of our lipoprotein particles for the distribution system to function. Without VLDL and LDL, cells can't receive shipments of cholesterol they need to maintain themselves, and they can't receive shipments of fat to burn for energy. And don't most people want to burn fat? So, how did LDL become the black sheep of the lipoprotein family? Cholesterol and cardiovascular disease, guilt by association. Since cholesterol is found inside the atherosclerotic plaques associated with heart attacks and strokes, it was assumed that LDL caused those plaques to form. However, decades of research have yet to produce credible support for this idea. In fact, there is ample evidence against it. We still don't fully understand how or why cholesterol finds its way inside blood vessel walls, but most experts now agree that LDL only gets trapped inside unhealthy blood vessels. The first step in plaque formation isn't high LDL levels, it's damage to the endothelium, the layer of cells that lines the inside of blood vessels. Many things can harm your endothelium, but the most important examples are smoking, high blood glucose levels, and high blood pressure. When damage occurs, a blood clot will form to try to protect the area. But if your clotting system is overactive or your immune system isn't working properly to heal the wound, the long, complicated process of plaque formation will begin, and eventually, cholesterol will make its way into the vessel wall, regardless of what your blood LDL level happens to be. For example, a 2009 study of 136,905 people who had just been admitted to the hospital with heart attacks found that nearly half of them had LDL levels below 100 milligrams per deciliter, which was the healthy limit recommended by expert guidelines at that time. This means that your LDL level is no better than a coin toss at predicting your risk of a heart attack. The truth is that a simple LDL level can't tell you whether or not you will have a future heart attack or stroke. It has to be interpreted in the context of the bigger clinical picture. For instance, if your LDL is high, it could simply mean that you are vigorously burning fat for energy. This may be why some individuals following a low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet see their LDL rise, and researchers are exploring this question. Meanwhile, back at the breakfast table, how many eggs are safe to eat? If you add 3 eggs per day to people's usual diets for weeks in a row, in most cases, their cholesterol level won't budge. About 1/3 of subjects will see a small rise in LDL, but they will also see a small rise in HDL. So their overall cholesterol ratio, a commonly used estimate of overall cardiovascular risk, doesn't change. Your body isn't a bucket that you pour cholesterol into until it spills over. Your digestive tract has sophisticated controls in place to regulate how much cholesterol you absorb from food, how much your cells manufacture, and how much you eliminate in your bile. In one interesting case, an 88-year-old man who had consumed at least 24 eggs every day for 15 years maintained a total cholesterol level of 150 to 200 milligrams per deciliter. Researchers found that his body only absorbed about 18% of the cholesterol he ate and had doubled its rate of cholesterol removal to keep his system in balance. If you overeat cholesterol, your body will respond by changing its behavior. And the same is true if you undereat cholesterol. Nearly every cell in your brain and body is equipped to manufacture cholesterol. So even if you eat a cholesterol-free vegan diet, your body will see to it that there is always plenty of cholesterol in your blood. A study of more than 3,500 women found there was no significant difference between the LDL levels of vegans, vegetarians, and omnivores. It's even possible for people eating vegan diets to have, quote, high cholesterol. The amount of cholesterol in your diet doesn't determine the amount of cholesterol in your blood. Your metabolism does. So, about those eggs. Cooked whole eggs are good sources of every nutrient we need, except for iron and vitamin C. Egg yolk is a good source of choline, vitamin B12, and vitamin A, and is one of the few sources of MK4, the brain's preferred form of vitamin K2. Egg yolks are rich in cholesterol, a vital nutrient. The number of eggs you eat per day has no bearing on your blood cholesterol level. Tips for nourishing, protecting, and energizing your brain with eggs. Eggs are very poor sources of iron, so if you don't eat meat, be sure to include other sources of iron in your diet. To maximize their nutritional benefits, cook eggs before eating and don't throw away the yolk. That's where the nutrients are. Eggs contain about twice as much fat as protein, an excellent macronutrient ratio for ketogenic diets. Egg allergies and sensitivities are not uncommon, so if you have unexplained physical or mental health symptoms, consider a 30-day egg-free experiment to explore this possibility. Cooked whole eggs feature a nearly perfect nutrient profile. Versatile, affordable, and available almost everywhere, eggs are among the healthiest foods you can eat. Unless you have an allergy or sensitivity to eggs, it is safe to enjoy them to your heart's content. The complicated nature of dairy. Wild aurochs, prehistoric cattle, were first domesticated in the Middle East about 10,000 years ago, and the earliest archaeological evidence that humans were consuming milk on a regular basis dates back only about 6,000 years to southern England. Today, foods made from the milk of various mammals, mainly cows, buffalo, goats, sheep, and camels, are considered staple foods in most countries, but are only rarely consumed in some parts of the world, such as China, Indonesia, and North Korea. I have found the experimental elimination of dairy to be a very useful tool in my clinical practice, particularly for addressing binge eating, digestive issues, and unexplained pain syndromes. This may be partly due to the complexity of the molecules dairy products contain, and/or the fact that human physiology hasn't had much time to adapt to this food group, given how recently it was added to the Western menu. Research into the potential connection between dairy and mental health problems is thin. But let's review the compelling scientific information that is available with the hope that it might inspire you to explore how this complicated food affects you. Milk micronutrients. Like the egg, milk is often called one of nature's most perfect foods, but its nutritional profile isn't quite as strong. Milk is a famously good source of calcium, but contains no vitamin D. So several countries, the United States, Canada, Norway, Sweden, and Finland, fortify milk with vitamin D because we can't absorb calcium without it. Milk is also naturally low in iodine, but most milk producers in industrialized countries add iodine to dairy cattle feed and use an iodine solution to disinfect udders prior to milking in a practice known as teat dipping. Cow's milk is also very low in iron, even compared to many other mammal milks, perhaps because industrial dairy practices push them to produce such large quantities of milk. Milk is a very poor source of the omega-3 fatty acids EPA and DHA, regardless of how the cow was raised. For example, most health organizations recommend adults obtain about 250 milligrams per day of EPA and DHA. Although milk from grass-fed cows does contain about 2/3 more EPA than milk from grain-fed cows, an 8-ounce glass still only provides about 10 milligrams of EPA and only about 2.5 milligrams of DHA. Milk contains no vitamin C because calves rely on vitamin C stores built up in utero until they reach about 4 months of age, when they become capable of making their own. Milk macronutrients. Milk is the only animal food that contains substantial quantities of all 3 major macronutrients: protein, fat, and carbohydrate. This is nature's recipe for rapid growth. Many of milk's macronutrient molecules are uniquely required by immature mammals, so you won't find them in meat. The quantity and type of macronutrients also varies from one species to another, as different mammals have different needs. Carbohydrate, lactose. The only type of carbohydrate milk contains is lactose, a special sugar found only in milk. Each lactose molecule consists of a glucose molecule bonded to another simple sugar molecule called galactose. When we are babies, our intestines produce an enzyme called lactase that breaks the bond between these 2 simple sugar molecules, allowing us to absorb glucose and galactose into the bloodstream. All other mammals permanently lose the ability to produce this enzyme after weaning because they no longer need it. And before the taming of the aurochs, early humans were no different. They lost their ability to digest lactose in early childhood as well. After the agricultural revolution, certain groups who relied more significantly on dairy farming, mostly in Northwest Europe, developed a genetic mutation that allowed some of them to produce lactase into their adult years. This trait is called lactase persistence. However, the majority of us, nearly 70%, still cannot properly digest lactose. In your accompanying PDF, you will find a table documenting the prevalence of lactose malabsorption by region and ethnicity, and what you will notice is that lactose intolerance varies considerably, ranging from as low as 5% in Scandinavia to nearly 100% in East Asia. Without sufficient lactase, any lactose you consume will cruise completely intact through your small intestine and all the way down into your colon, where it will encounter swarms of gut bacteria. However, they don't possess lactase either, so they can't digest it down into glucose and galactose for us. Instead, bacteria ferment, partially digest the lactose, releasing fatty acids and gases in the process. As anyone with severe lactose intolerance knows, these gases can cause significant bloating, pain, and/or diarrhea. Since lactose is identical across all species, if you are intolerant to the lactose in cow's milk, you will be intolerant to the lactose in all other milks as well. Fortunately, Lactose intolerance is not a dangerous condition. It's simply a sign that your digestive system has matured and you no longer need milk. The dairy products highest in lactose are milk, milk powder, condensed milk, buttermilk, cottage cheese, ice cream, yogurt, and kefir. Dairy products that contain mostly fat, such as butter, ghee, and cream, have very little lactose. And dairy products that have been aged for a long time, such as hard cheeses and ripened cheeses, are very low in lactose because the bacteria used in the fermentation process have already eaten the lactose for you. Here's a tip. If the nutrition label on a dairy product lists the carbohydrate content as 0 milligrams, then the product contains little to no lactose. Lactose-reduced and lactose-free products are available in some areas, and lactase supplements can help ease symptoms. However, if even low-lactose dairy products don't agree with you, you may have an intolerance to dairy protein. Dairy proteins. If left out too long, milk will eventually separate into solid lumps, or curds, of calcium-rich proteins called caseins that sink to the bottom, and a watery substance containing dissolved whey proteins that float to the top. Caseins and wheys are the two main categories of protein found in all types of milk, and they are designed not only to nourish the newborn, but also to transmit information from mother cow to calf that regulates genes, trains the immune system, builds the microbiome, and stimulates growth pathways. Caseins are complicated. 80% of the proteins in cow's milk are caseins, compared to less than 50% in human breast milk. Casein molecules are sticky, so sticky, in fact, that they were historically used as an active ingredient in wood glue. This property causes caseins to clump together in the gut and form large clots of protein that take a long time to digest, essentially serving as an extended-release source of nutrients to sustain the calf between feedings. In the human gut, cow caseins can take so long to dismantle into individual amino acids that indigestion or constipation may occur. Partially digested casein fragments may also cause problems of their own for some people. This appears to be particularly true in the case of A1 beta casein, a type of casein found in the milk of certain herds descended from Northern European stock, including Holstein cows. In the Western world, Holsteins have long been bred with other dairy cattle, so most milk sold in Western markets now contains A1 beta casein. This is in contrast to A2 casein, found in the milk of purebred Asian and African cattle breeds, as well as certain mainland European stock, such as Jersey cows. Incomplete digestion of A1 beta casein can generate beta-casomorphins, morphine-like molecules with narcotic and inflammatory properties. If these casomorphins bind to naturally existing opiate receptors in the human gut, they may slow down digestive machinery and lead to constipation, just as morphine and other narcotic medications can. They can also trigger inflammation, which may irritate or damage the gut lining. This is important because inflammation in the body can also cause inflammation in the brain. Scientific studies of dairy and brain inflammation are few and far between. But what we do have is intriguing. The most striking example? There are well-documented cases of infants and children with epilepsy whose seizures completely resolved when dairy was eliminated from the diet, whether they tested positive for cow's milk allergy or not. These experiences tell us that sensitivity to cow's milk can profoundly destabilize brain chemistry in susceptible individuals. It is common for parents of children with autism spectrum conditions to experiment with diets free of casein and gluten in hopes of seeing improvement in autism symptoms. And some non-randomized trials have reported significant benefits with this intervention. However, the few small randomized controlled trials that have been conducted so far have not found benefits. Is dairy addictive? Most low-carbohydrate and ketogenic diets emphasize heavy cream, butter, and cheese because they are naturally low in carbohydrate. Quite a few of my patients feel addicted to dairy products, which can lead to cravings, binge eating, and unwanted fat gain. One reason for this may be that casein stimulates the release of a hormone called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor type 1, which stimulates growth pathways in our bodies and increases appetite. Casomorphins may also have something to do with it because they can cross the blood-brain barrier and stimulate opiate receptors in the brain. However, the opiate-like effects of casomorphins are fairly weak compared to drugs like morphine. And, to make matters more complicated, some dairy proteins even have anti-opiate properties. Perhaps the allure of dairy products is that processing methods, even traditional methods like fermentation, churning, and salting, concentrate their ingredients and intensify their flavor profiles. There isn't enough research to be certain about what drives some people to lose control over their appetite and eating behavior when eating dairy products. But if you struggle with overeating, a dairy-free experiment is well worth trying. A woman in her 60s with a long history of overeating consulted with me because she was trying to transition to a ketogenic diet but couldn't make it past day 3 without intense cravings and urges to binge. The plan she was following allowed for up to 4 ounces of cheese per day, so she had been enjoying cream cheese as a daily snack. When I suggested she try setting all dairy aside as an experiment, she was easily able to make it past day 3, get into ketosis, and enjoy excellent appetite control without making any other changes to her menu. Whey proteins. Whey proteins are popular with bodybuilders because they are rapidly digested into individual amino acids, stimulating an insulin surge that supports the growth and repair of muscle tissue after exercise. They are also popular with processed food companies who use them to manufacture so-called keto-friendly products such as shakes, chips, cereals, and bars. Although whey protein contains no carbohydrate and doesn't raise glucose levels, it raises insulin levels substantially. So it can turn fat burning off and reduce ketone levels. In fact, the insulin response to whey is almost as dramatic as the insulin response to pure glucose. Buyer beware. Just because the label says keto-friendly doesn't necessarily mean the product is ketogenic or friendly. Dairy fat. Dairy fat is interesting in that it is the only animal fat that contains more saturated fat than unsaturated fat. However, as we've already established, saturated fat in and of itself is not unhealthy. Furthermore, the fat within full-fat dairy products is where the fat-soluble vitamins reside. For example, grass-fed butter is a good source of vitamin A and one of the few sources of MK4, the brain's preferred form of vitamin K2. Compared to lactose and dairy proteins, which are fairly common causes of dairy intolerance, the fat within dairy products may actually be their least problematic ingredient. Some of my patients with dairy intolerance seem to do better with butter, which is mostly dairy fat, or better yet, ghee, which has been heated to remove as much protein as possible. However, some of my patients do poorly with all dairy products, including ghee, suggesting either that they're sensitive to trace amounts of protein that may remain, or that they're reacting to some unknown problematic element within the dairy fat itself. Unfortunately, there's very little research on the topic of dairy fat intolerance, so we can only speculate. Dairy and insulin resistance. Perhaps the most compelling reason to reconsider the role of dairy in your diet is that a number of human clinical trials have found that dairy products raise insulin levels and cause insulin resistance. In one particularly interesting experiment, researchers in Denmark asked 24 healthy 8-year-old boys to add 53 grams of animal protein per day to their usual diets. Half of them were to consume this additional protein in the form of 8.8 ounces of lean meat, and the other half were to add 2 liters of skim milk. After 7 days, the fasting insulin levels and insulin resistance of boys in the meat group remained unchanged, whereas the fasting insulin levels of those in the milk group had doubled, and insulin resistance had increased by 75%. Dairy, calcium, and bone health. We're told the biggest reason we need dairy is because it is rich in calcium, which supports bone growth and prevents osteoporosis. And yet, our fellow mammals all appear capable of generating complete sets of bones and teeth without consuming milk beyond early life. Since there's no reliable way to diagnose calcium deficiency, it's hard to know how much calcium we really need and whether we're getting enough from the foods we eat. But some research suggests that dairy products may not be essential to bone health. For example, countries where milk intake is high, such as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, report the highest rates of hip fracture in the world, whereas China, Indonesia, and India, where milk intake is low, report the lowest rates of hip fracture. Also, osteoporosis was rare prior to the industrial age and occurs much more often in industrialized areas of the world, suggesting that it may be related to aspects of our modern lifestyle other than how much milk we consume. Bones do need calcium, but total bone health is about much more than the amount of calcium in your diet. Optimal absorption of calcium requires vitamin D3, and optimal binding of calcium to bone requires vitamin K2. As mentioned earlier, keeping glucose and insulin levels in a healthy range helps to minimize inflammation, which can damage bone over time. Sodium and caffeine both increase the amount of calcium your body loses in the urine. Bone is made largely of protein, so obtaining enough protein to support bone structure and engaging in weight-bearing exercise to stimulate bone metabolism is essential. Does dairy really do a body good? Dairy products are excellent sources of calcium and good sources of most other essential nutrients except for vitamin C, vitamin D, iron, EPA, DHA, and sometimes iodine. Dairy products contain high-quality protein that provides all essential amino acids. Lactose intolerance is exceedingly common and evolutionarily appropriate. Allergies and intolerances to dairy proteins are common and may contribute to gastrointestinal distress, acne, eczema, asthma, migraine, chronic pain syndromes, and other inflammatory conditions. Dairy products contain unique molecules that can contribute to insulin resistance, metabolic dysfunction, appetite dysregulation, and weight gain. All dairy caseins are difficult to digest. Milk from certain breeds of cattle contain A1 beta casein, which may also have narcotic and inflammatory properties. Tips for nourishing, protecting, and energizing your brain with dairy. If you have never tried a dairy-free experiment, I encourage you to set aside all dairy products for 30 days to see how you feel. If you find dairy products to be addictive, inflammatory, constipating, or fattening, or if they make you feel depressed, unfocused, or fatigued, it would be wise to eliminate them from your diet permanently. If you decide to go dairy-free and you're worried about calcium, know that calcium is present in certain other animal foods, including shrimp and small, soft-boned fish such as sardines, anchovies, and mackerel. Some plant foods also contain calcium, with the most bioavailable sources being cruciferous vegetables. If you feel better without dairy but don't want to permanently avoid it, try reintroducing different dairy products one at a time to see which ones bother you least. For example, if dairy protein is your issue, you may tolerate low-protein dairy products such as ghee and butter fairly well. You might try seeking out A2 milk so you can compare its effects to A1 milk. Pure A2 milk is usually clearly labeled as such to attract consumers interested in its potential health benefits. If you suspect you are sensitive to lactose, look for dairy products with a carbohydrate count of 0 grams per serving. You may find fermented dairy products such as hard cheeses, sour cream, and full-fat yogurt to be gentler on your system because fermentation removes lactose and partially breaks down dairy proteins. However, fermentation also changes dairy proteins in ways that can make some people feel worse, as we'll see in Chapter 19. If you choose to include dairy in your diet, full-fat dairy products are more nutritious, more satisfying, and less processed. Milk is a species-specific growth formula, and therefore the most complex food on Earth. And that's even before we churn, ferment, and skim it into the staggering variety of dairy products available today. We know so little about how each of these products affects our mental and physical health. But what we do know strongly suggests that the human diet should not include milk beyond early childhood, particularly not the milk of other species. Be careful with this food group. Even if you can't pinpoint any negative effects, if you are pursuing optimal mental and physical health, it may still be wise to avoid dairy entirely. Chapter 12. Grains, Beans, Nuts, and Seeds. Consumer beware. Seeds are most durable and concentrated foods. They're rugged lifeboats, designed to carry a plant's offspring to the shore of an uncertain future. Harold McGee on Food and Cooking. We think of grains, beans, nuts, and seeds as unrelated, but crack any of them open, and you'll find a tiny embryo crouched inside. Even though we only use the word seed for one branch of this family, deep down, all of these foods are seeds. Grains are the seeds of grasses, wheat, corn, rice, oats, etc. Beans are the seeds of legumes, peas, soybeans, lentils, etc. Nuts are the seeds of trees, almonds, walnuts, pistachios, etc. Seeds are mostly the seeds of flowers, sunflower seeds, poppy seeds, sesame seeds, etc. To avoid confusion, we'll use seed foods as an umbrella term to refer to all grains, beans, nuts, and seeds. Just as dairy products are the most complicated animal foods on Earth, seed foods are the most complicated plant foods on Earth. Protecting and nurturing the future generation of one's species is no easy task, and these weighty responsibilities are what make these simultaneously the most nutritious and most problematic plant foods you can eat. Avoiding the seed food family as much as you can, especially grains and legumes, is one of the most important things you can do to protect your brain and overall health. However, if you want or need to include this food group in your diet, I will show you how to make safer, healthier choices. The benefits and risks of seed foods. Grains, beans, nuts, and seeds are the most nutritious parts of plants because they must contain every nutrient an embryo needs to develop the roots, shoots, and leaves that will ultimately establish the seedling's independence. All seed foods contain protein to provide the amino acid building blocks their seedlings need to grow. But beans and nuts are generally richer in protein than grains and seeds, making foods like soybeans, peas, and nuts critical staples in vegan diets and in the diets of great numbers of people around the world with limited access to animal protein. Despite being much lower in protein and fat than other seed foods, grains are less expensive and easier to grow in large quantities than beans, nuts, and seeds. So they are an important source of carbohydrate calories worldwide and figure prominently in the dietary guidelines of most countries. The nutritional advantages of grains, beans, nuts, and seeds must be weighed against the fact that every member of the seed food family must not only nourish its precious cargo, but also defend it from the elements and from predators large and small until conditions are right to sprout. Animals protect themselves from being eaten using action-oriented strategies like growling, biting, charging, and fleeing. But plants are stationary and voiceless. These physical limitations can make them appear helpless and vulnerable, but looks can be deceiving. In fact, seed foods are the most heavily armed of all plant foods. Not only do they wear tough exterior shells and hulls, but concealed within these rugged structures are invisible stockpiles of chemical weapons, toxins, and anti-nutrients that pose risks to human health. The birth of agriculture. From deep within Israel's Dead Sea Rift, archaeologists have unearthed remnants of almonds, pistachios, and other nuts, along with pitted stones that were likely used as nutcrackers, suggesting that our prehistoric ancestors were consuming nuts as long ago as 780,000 BC. By comparison, although stone tools were used in Mozambique to grind sorghum grains about 100,000 years ago, it wasn't until about 11,000 years ago that humans appear to have begun consuming grain in significant quantities on a regular basis, as evidenced by the discovery of large storage structures containing barley and oats in the West Bank, indicating that humans had begun consuming grain in significant quantities on a regular basis. As for legumes, evidence of domesticated fava beans in Israel and lentils in Southwest Asia dates back as far as 10,000 years ago. Most experts trace the birth of agriculture to the Fertile Crescent, about 11,000 years ago. Arching from the Persian Gulf to northern Egypt, this cradle of civilization, as it is called, was blessed with rich soils irrigated by the rhythmic flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Over the next 5,000 years, farming would become a way of life almost everywhere. But it appears we paid a price for it, both socially and biologically. As historian Yuval Noah writes in his book, Sapiens, cultivating wheat provided much more food per unit of territory and thereby enabled Homo sapiens to multiply exponentially. This is the essence of the agricultural revolution, the ability to keep more people alive under worse conditions. Anthropological records reveal that individuals living in agricultural societies were generally of shorter stature than their hunter-gatherer relatives who came before them, and that their bodies showed evidence of mineral deficiencies, malnutrition, and infectious diseases. Thousands of years may seem like enough time for us to adapt to eating these foods, but from an evolutionary standpoint, it is the blink of an eye. Our species, Homo sapiens, is about 200,000 years old, so we have only been consuming grains and legumes for 5% of our history at most. Seed macronutrients. Like milk, all seed foods contain nature's recipe for growth, a combination of all three macronutrients in fair amounts: protein, fat, and carbohydrate. However, while cow's milk macronutrients are intended for the young of another mammalian species, seed macronutrients are intended for the young of a completely different kingdom, the plant kingdom. as opposed to the animal kingdom to which we belong. It is therefore not surprising that their macronutrient composition is less than optimal for human nourishment. We are often told that these foods are good for us because they are rich in plant protein and complex carbohydrates, low in saturated fat, and cholesterol-free. All true statements. But the whole truth is that their proteins usually don't contain the balance of amino acids we need. Most of the proteins and carbohydrates are difficult to digest, and there is no reason to avoid saturated fat or cholesterol. Seed food proteins. It's certainly possible to obtain all of your essential amino acids from seed foods alone, but it requires special knowledge, extra effort, and, almost always, more food. All seed foods do contain all 9 essential amino acids, but usually not in quantities sufficient to meet our needs. For example, grains tend to be low in lysine, and legumes tend to be low in methionine and cysteine. Seed proteins are also guarded by anti-nutrients that make their proteins less available to us. For example, many seed foods contain protease inhibitors that interfere with the enzymes in our gut that break proteins down into individual amino acids. Cooking inactivates most protease inhibitors, but there are still other anti-protein factors in seed foods to contend with, including phytate, which heat can't completely neutralize, and tannins, which are indestructible. To help navigate this seed protein obstacle course, scientists have developed a protein quality index called the Digestible Indispensable Amino Acid Score, or DIAAS. This scoring system takes the digestibility and the amino acid balance of various proteins and rolls them into a single number. In your accompanying PDF, you will find a table listing the DIAA scores of common plant and animal proteins. A DIAAS of 100 or above means that you can meet or exceed your daily requirement for all essential amino acids by eating that food alone. What you'll notice when reviewing that table is that all animal foods have DIAA scores of 100 or higher, indicating that they contain highly digestible forms of every amino acid we need. Scores for tofu, chickpeas, and pea protein concentrate fall between 75 and 100 and are therefore considered good quality proteins. The remaining plant proteins are considered poor choices as they all score well below 75. With the notable exception of tofu, if you're trying to meet your amino acid requirements using plant foods alone, you will need to mix and match your protein choices properly to avoid deficiencies over time. Seed food fats. Nuts and seeds tend to be much higher in fat than grains and legumes. Except for coconuts and palm kernels, which are both very high in saturated fat, most of the fats in nuts and seeds are monounsaturated fatty acids, or MUFAs, mainly oleic acid, and polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs, 2 of which we are told are essential, linoleic acid and the omega-3 alpha-linolenic acid, or ALA. As discussed in Chapter 6, linoleic acid is easy to find in a wide variety of plant and animal foods, but ALA is much harder to come by. Many animal foods contain some ALA, but there are a few plant foods such as flax seeds, walnuts, and chia seeds that are rich in ALA, so they are prized and marketed as excellent sources of omega-3s. But ALA is not the omega-3 we should be looking for. The omega-3s we need are EPA, which helps your immune system fight inflammation, and DHA, critical for brain development, brain cell signaling, brain immune system function, and energy production. In fact, the only thing we need ALA for is to turn it into EPA and DHA. Building DHA molecules for the brain would be a fine use of ALA. But, unfortunately, our capacity to convert ALA into DHA is extremely low. Non-pregnant women convert at most about 9% of the ALA they consume into DHA, and the conversion rate in men is only 0 to 4%. Whether these low and unreliable conversion rates are sufficient to meet the needs of most adults is unclear. But we do know they are too low to fulfill the omega-3 requirements of pregnant women and infants, as we will see in Chapter 15. It would make more sense to recategorize EPA and DHA as essential omega-3 fatty acids because ALA is only required if we don't consume enough EPA and DHA, both of which you can obtain from animal foods, or vegan-friendly algae-derived supplements if you prefer. Seed food carbohydrates. Seed food carbohydrates generally fall into two categories: simple starches that our gut enzymes digest easily down into glucose, and a variety of complex sugars, starches, and fibers that our gut enzymes can't digest at all. All plant foods contain indigestible carbohydrates, but within the seed foods, the most abundant example is raffinose. Raffinose consists of long strands of simple sugar molecules, glucose, fructose, and galactose, woven together in a pattern impossible for human digestive enzymes to unravel. So it sails through the upper intestine completely intact. This is good news for colon bacteria, who welcome raffinose into the lower intestine with an enzyme called alpha-galactosidase that deftly dismantles it into individual sugar molecules. Our colon cells aren't capable of absorbing sugar, so bacteria proceed to ferment them, breaking them down into short-chain fatty acids like butyrate that colon cells can burn for energy, and gases like hydrogen, carbon dioxide, and methane. Depending on how much you eat and how sensitive you are, you could experience anything from mild discomfort to severe bloating, cramping, indigestion, nausea, and/or diarrhea. Legumes such as beans, chickpeas, and lentils are relatively rich in raffinose and therefore notorious for causing digestive distress. In fact, the raffinose family of indigestible sugars is the single greatest cause of flatulence in the human diet. Soaking, sprouting, fermenting, and cooking can reduce the amount of raffinose in seed foods. Beano, an over-the-counter anti-gas remedy, contains the same enzyme that your colon bacteria make, so if you swallow this enzyme before you eat beans, it will break the starches down into sugars in your upper intestine where they can be absorbed. Nutritional quality, micronutrients. Many seed foods contain B vitamins, especially B1, B2, B6, and B9, and nuts can also provide vitamin E and vitamin K1. But this food group is otherwise relatively micronutrient poor. Although standard nutrient tables list many seed foods as being high in essential minerals such as magnesium, zinc, iron, copper, or manganese, remember, just because a food contains a nutrient doesn't mean we can access it. Many seed food minerals are hard to access. All seed foods contain phytate, a mineral magnet that binds tightly to iron, zinc, calcium, magnesium, and copper. When the time comes to sprout, phytate gets broken down, releasing these essential minerals to support the growth of young seedlings. Humans don't possess the enzymes needed to disable phytate and free minerals from its grip. So most phytate survives digestion and makes it all the way down to the colon. Although your colon bacteria will start to break it down, most phytate leaves your system intact, carrying precious minerals away with it. Seed foods can interfere substantially with your ability to absorb minerals from other foods as well. Atlantic oysters are the richest known source of zinc among all animal foods. In a 1979 experiment, researchers demonstrated that when people ate oysters, their zinc levels peaked nicely in the bloodstream, indicating excellent absorption. When oysters were eaten with black beans, people absorbed only about half the zinc from the oysters. And when oysters were eaten with corn tortillas, people absorbed virtually none of the zinc from the oysters. Phytate can only block absorption of non-heme iron, the only form of iron found in plant foods. It is powerless over heme iron. Remember, animal foods contain a mixture of heme iron and non-heme iron. Therefore, if you consume iron-rich animal foods, such as steak, duck, or mussels, together with seed foods, you will still be able to absorb the heme iron from those animal foods. Soaking, cooking, sprouting, and fermentation can all help reduce the phytate content of whole grains. Most grains, except corn, store phytate in their bran coating, whereas most beans, nuts, and seeds store phytate in their starchy centers. This means that whole grains, which have not had their bran layer removed, such as wheat berries and brown rice, are high in phytate, but refined grains, which have had their bran layer removed, such as wheat flour and polished rice, are low in phytate. This is one reason why whole grains are not always more nutritious than refined grains. Soy and millet interfere with thyroid function. The thyroid is a butterfly-shaped gland located in front of your throat. Its main job is to combine the essential mineral iodine with the non-essential amino acid tyrosine to make thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone regulates the metabolism of every cell in the brain and body, directs multiple aspects of brain development, and influences dozens of genes that regulate mood, energy, and sleep, which explains why people with low thyroid hormone activity, or hypothyroidism, can feel sluggish and depressed. When the thyroid gland malfunctions, it can grow large and swollen, forming a goiter. Therefore, any substance with the potential to stress the thyroid gland, whether it ultimately leads to a goiter or not, is called a goitrogen. The most important goitrogens in the seed food family are soy isoflavones and millet flavonoids. Soy isoflavones. The isoflavones in soybeans interfere with thyroid peroxidase, the enzyme your thyroid gland uses to insert iodine into thyroid hormone. The more isoflavones you consume, the more iodine you will need to overcome their anti-thyroid effects. For example, it's been known since the 1960s that soy-based formula increases the risk that healthy infants will develop hypothyroidism. For this reason, manufacturers are required to add iodine to soy formula to help counteract the anti-thyroid effects of soy isoflavones. And pediatricians recommend that children with hypothyroidism avoid soy products. There is good evidence that soy has anti-thyroid effects in adults as well. In an 8-week-long randomized control trial, 60 patients with borderline hypothyroidism were given either 2 milligrams of soy isoflavones per day, the estimated amount in a typical omnivore diet, or 16 milligrams of soy isoflavones per day, the estimated amount in a typical vegetarian diet. The vegetarian dose of soy isoflavones was 3 times more likely to cause patients to convert from borderline, subclinical hypothyroidism to full-blown clinical hypothyroidism. Since 2009, the Senate Commission on Food Safety of the German Research Foundation has recommended that adults at higher risk, such as people with iodine deficiency, subclinical hypothyroidism, and or those born with thyroid dysfunction, avoid isoflavone supplements and limit total isoflavone intake from food to no more than 50 milligrams per day, the amount found in 4 to 8 ounces of tofu. Millet flavonoids. The antithyroid flavonoids in millet are particularly potent. Depending on where you live, you may know millet as birdseed, a gluten-free alternative to wheat, or an everyday grain. In Sudan and several other countries in Africa, pearl millet is a staple grain that appears to contribute significantly to the high incidence of goiter in children, even in areas where iodine deficiency is not a concern. Unfortunately, soaking, cooking, sprouting, and fermenting can't destroy soy or millet goitrogens. So the only way to reduce your exposure is to limit the quantity of these foods in your diet. Other seed food anti-nutrients. Phytates and goitrogens aren't the only anti-nutrients in seed foods. Cocoa beans and almonds are examples of seed foods high in oxalates, which interfere with mineral absorption. Cocoa beans and walnuts are examples of seed foods high in tannins, which interfere with protein, vitamin B1, and iron absorption. We'll return to these in the next chapter, but now it's time to shift our attention away from anti-nutrients. Hopefully before you notice that cocoa beans, the main ingredient in dark chocolate, are seed foods. Seed food warfare. All plants defend themselves using chemical weapons, and the most heavily defended part of the plant is its seeds. So seed foods contain a multitude of malicious molecules, each designed to harm you in its own unique way. Lectins and human health. When a seed is stressed or damaged, which can occur in the process of our chewing and trying to digest it, it releases defensive molecules called lectins to identify and attack potential enemies. These sticky proteins recognize friend from foe by reading signature carbohydrates on the surfaces of foreign cells. Every living thing is armed with a variety of its own species-specific lectins, some much more potent than others. All plant foods contain lectins, but the highest concentrations of some of the most aggressive plant lectins are found in grains and legumes, most notably kidney beans, fava beans, peanuts, which are technically legumes, peas, soybeans, and wheat. Why would the lectins in grains and legumes be more vicious than those in nuts and seeds? It may be because nut trees and certain seed-bearing plants need animals to spread their seeds, whereas grain and legume plants don't. If nut and seed-producing plants make their lectins too toxic, they risk harming the animals that help them scatter their seeds. Grains and legumes don't need to concern themselves with the safety of other species. Wind currents carry grain seeds to new destinations, and legume pods explode in the heat of the sun, shooting their seeds into the air so they can make their lectins as toxic as they like. While most edible nuts and seeds can be eaten raw without immediate consequence, lectins are the reason why grains and legumes should never be consumed raw. Documented outbreaks of food poisoning in humans resulting in severe gastrointestinal illness have been caused by undercooked kidney beans and broad beans, as well as raw, unripe French beans and runner beans. Lectins resist digestion and can bind to, penetrate, and change the behavior of their target cells in any number of ways. Some lectins cause blood cells to clump together. Some stimulate cells to multiply. Some poison ribosomes, cell protein factories, and some command cells to commit suicide, apoptosis. Lectins have been shown in laboratory studies to damage human intestinal cells, and in animal studies to poke holes in their intestinal linings, leading researchers to speculate about whether they could contribute to increased intestinal permeability, or leaky gut, in living humans as well. Leaky gut syndromes are more common in people with certain psychiatric conditions, including autism, mood disorders, and schizophrenia, although it's unclear exactly how they are related to each other. Note that high blood glucose levels also loosen the connections between intestinal cells, as can anything that causes inflammation. Lectins can penetrate the cells of your digestive tract and enter your bloodstream, which may trigger your immune system to produce antibodies against them. Researchers at UCLA found that approximately 15% of healthy blood donors tested positive for antibodies to lectins from wheat, kidney beans, peanuts, peas, soybeans, and lentils. These antibodies bind to a wide variety of human tissues and proteins throughout the brain and body, with wheat lectin antibodies being the most reactive and most promiscuous. The fact that lectins can trigger your body to produce antibodies that cross-react with your own cells lends support to the theory that lectin-rich seed foods may help pave a path to autoimmune diseases, conditions in which your immune system targets your own healthy cells for destruction. Lectins are so skilled at breaching cell boundaries that researchers use them to chaperone drugs and other substances across the gut lining and even across the blood-brain barrier. Rat studies conducted by scientists at Penn State used a lectin isolated from peas to help a pesticide associated with Parkinson's disease to pierce the stomach and travel into the brain via the vagus nerve, which connects the gut with the brain. Only when the pesticide was accompanied by pea lectin was it able to cause Parkinson's symptoms in these animals, leading the researchers to theorize that lectins may represent a key environmental factor in the development of this disease. Despite decades of lectin research, human clinical studies are few and far between, so we can only speculate about their potential to contribute to mental health problems. However, it's safe to say that plants do not produce these molecules with your well-being in mind. If the lectins in grains and legumes are poking holes in your gut, provoking your immune system to paint targets on your healthy cells, and even penetrating your brain, they could be harming you in ways that we don't yet fully understand. I encourage you to err on the side of caution and either avoid seed food lectins entirely or at least take steps to minimize their risks. Fortunately, most lectins can be nearly completely inactivated by pre-soaking seed foods for 12 hours and then boiling for at least 15 minutes, with some authorities recommending boiling for a full hour. Dry heat, baking or roasting, is not as effective as prolonged boiling, so baked goods made with grain or bean flours are not as safe as boiled goods. For example, dry roasting only removes about 75% of the lectins from raw peanuts. Sprouting and fermentation also reduce lectin content to some extent. Flax seeds produce cyanide. Flax seeds have become a popular superfood in recent years, particularly among those following vegan diets, because they are one of the few plant foods rich in the omega-3 fatty acid ALA. But are they worth the risk? Sink your teeth into a handful of raw flax seeds or whir them into a smoothie, and the damage you inflict on them will inspire a harmless chemical inside those seeds called linamarin to transform itself into cyanide. Cyanide is a deadly chemical that muscles its way into your mitochondria and inserts itself into your electron transport chains, blocking their ability to produce energy. Fortunately, the liver can detoxify a certain amount of cyanide. A 150-pound individual can detoxify 4.2 milligrams of cyanide per hour. And the quantity of cyanide in flax seeds is fairly low, approximately 5 milligrams per tablespoon. However, these estimates can vary depending on the flaxseed source and preparation method, as well as the health status of the consumer, So there's enough uncertainty surrounding the potential risk that national guidelines vary. For example, the European Food Safety Authority warns that toddlers should not consume more than 1/3 of a teaspoon of flaxseed per day, and that adults should not consume more than about 3.5 teaspoons per day, or their blood levels could edge into the toxic, but still non-lethal range. Whereas Food Standards Australia-New Zealand view flax seeds as generally safe. There are no documented human cases of death or even illness related to flaxseed consumption, which is reassuring. But this doesn't help us understand how repeated exposure to small amounts of cyanide over time may affect the health of your brain mitochondria and therefore your mental health. If there is any risk involved, it is likely small. But the good news is that flax seeds contain the wrong kind of omega-3 fatty acids, so there's no need to eat them in the first place. Gluten, wheat, and mental health. Strictly speaking, gluten is neither a toxin nor an anti-nutrient. It is simply a protein found in wheat, barley, rye, and triticale, which is a cross between wheat and barley. Problems with gluten stem from the fact that we lack the enzymes needed to completely break it down into individual amino acids, an evolutionary clue that we're not properly adapted to nourishing ourselves with wheat and related grains. Just as fragments of partially digested dairy casein proteins can be problematic, so too can partially digested gluten fragments. Gluten poses clear risks to mental health, at least in susceptible individuals. Gluten can cause celiac disease, an autoimmune disease in which the body generates antibodies against proteins in the small intestine. It is well established that psychiatric conditions are more common in people with celiac disease, particularly autism spectrum disorders, attention deficit disorders, depression, anxiety, and eating disorders. About half of people with celiac disease have no gastrointestinal symptoms whatsoever, which often delays the diagnosis for many years. However, even people without celiac disease can have heightened immune reactions to gluten. For example, people with schizophrenia, autism spectrum disorder, and bipolar disorder are more likely to have antibodies against gluten-derived peptides, incompletely digested protein fragments, in their bloodstream than those in the general population. Levels of these antibodies can be up to 4 times higher in people with schizophrenia compared to people without schizophrenia. There are published case reports of people with schizophrenia and autistic spectrum disorders improving on gluten-free diets, and several studies suggesting that gluten can contribute to depression and anxiety symptoms in some people. The best documented example I'm aware of is a 2015 case report that meticulously details the case of a 14-year-old Sicilian girl with severe psychotic symptoms, including hallucinations, paranoia, and suicidal thoughts, whose symptoms were due entirely to non-celiac wheat sensitivity. A dramatic example to be sure, but it illustrates how psychiatrically dangerous wheat can be for some people. I have also personally witnessed a handful of cases of clinical depression which resolved entirely by removing gluten-containing foods from the diet, including this case of severe bipolar depression. A graduate student in his late 20s came to me for help with severe bipolar II disorder. When depression overtook him, he would spend most of the day in bed and couldn't read, study, or attend classes. When hypomania arrived, it would infuse the depression with the energy to act on his depressed thoughts, which included thoughts of harming himself. Like some people with depression, he felt compelled to make shallow cuts on the skin of his forearms with a razor, which would temporarily bring some relief. For years, these unpredictable shifts in mood had interrupted his life. He had been hospitalized multiple times with suicidal thoughts and cutting behaviors and was a year behind in working toward his degree due to medical leaves of absence. Having tried more than a half a dozen psychiatric medications that did nothing more than cause unpleasant side effects, he consulted with me about dietary interventions. He didn't feel ready to try a major dietary change, such as a paleo or ketogenic diet, so he asked if there was anything simpler he could try first. I recommended he start with a gluten-free experiment, which he eagerly committed to, and within a week, both he and his family noticed a major change. His mood lifted, his energy, concentration, and productivity improved, and he felt better than he had in many years. He responded so well to this plan that his whole family adopted the diet in solidarity. It must be noted that when people feel better on gluten-free diets, it can be very difficult to confirm without special testing that the culprit was gluten itself, and not some other problematic ingredient in wheat products, such as wheat germ-agglutinin, a potent lectin, or glyphosate, a neurotoxic pesticide commonly sprayed on wheat crops. The clinical research in this field is far from conclusive, and most people who simply eliminate gluten-containing foods from their diets won't see their psychiatric symptoms disappear. But if you are suffering from mental health problems, you have nothing to lose by exploring this approach to see if it helps you feel better. Fear of missing out? The 2020 U.S. Dietary Guidelines list grains as an essential food group, recommending that adults eat 6 ounces of grain-based food per day, the equivalent of 6 slices of bread or 3 cups of rice. Why are grains, the least nutritious of the seed foods, considered essential? Do they contain nutrients we can't obtain anywhere else? Nutrition policymakers explain that grains belong in a healthy diet because grains are rich in complex carbohydrates and fiber. True, but you can obtain these from fruits and vegetables as well. Grains contain B vitamins. True, but only a few. Grains contain essential minerals. True, but most are hard to access. And grains contain antioxidants and phytonutrients. True, but see Chapter 14. Instead of giving grains their own group, the United Kingdom's Eat Well Guide places grains in a starchy foods group. So grains are not explicitly required, although 4 of the 5 starchy foods in that group are grains or grain products. By lumping grains in with starchy vegetables like potatoes, the Eat Well Guide is quietly acknowledging that grains have no nutritional advantages over other starchy foods. But don't you need to eat whole grains to be healthy? You've heard this countless times, but there is no evidence to support it. In 2019, researchers in New Zealand published a sweeping meta-analysis of 58 human clinical trials, concluding that whole grains can help in the fight against numerous chronic diseases, including obesity, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain cancers. This paper received a great deal of positive attention from scientists and journalists around the world. But examine the author's conclusion, and you may notice the problem. They wrote, implementation of recommendations to increase dietary fiber intake and to replace refined grains with whole grains is expected to benefit human health. Do you hear what I hear? Researchers didn't compare diets with whole grains to diets without grains. They made the common mistake of comparing diets containing whole grains to diets containing refined grains. These studies can't tell us that whole grains are healthy. All they can tell us is that whole grains are healthier than refined grains. To my knowledge, there are no studies designed to explore the question of whether we need grains of any kind in the first place, although it's difficult to imagine why we would, since there are no nutrients in grains that we can't obtain elsewhere. What about the other seed foods? The U.S. Dietary Guidelines recently placed beans, nuts, and seeds together in the protein foods group along with lean meat, seafood, poultry, and eggs, indicating that you can meet your protein needs by eating seed foods or animal foods, your choice. Grouping these foods together implies that they are nutritional equals, when the fact is that seed foods are nutritionally inferior to animal foods in every way. Seed foods in a nutshell. Seed foods are the most nutritious and the most problematic of all plant foods. Seed foods can be good sources of several B vitamins. Fattier seed foods like nuts may also contain vitamin E and vitamin K1. Seed foods do contain minerals, but most are hard to access due to anti-nutrients. The proteins in most seed foods, with the exception of soy, quinoa, and buckwheat, are incomplete, meaning they do not provide all 9 essential amino acids in sufficient quantities. So, meeting amino acid requirements without animal foods requires education and planning. Grains, beans, nuts, and seeds fiercely protect their embryos using defensive toxins that can jeopardize your gut health, immune system, thyroid health, mitochondrial health, and mental health. The defensive lectins in grains and legumes tend to be more toxic than those in most nuts and edible seeds. Flax seeds, chia seeds, and walnuts are good sources of the omega-3 fatty acid ALA, but the omega-3s we actually need are EPA and DHA. Flax seeds contain small amounts of cyanide. It is unclear whether they pose any risk to human health. Many seed foods, especially legumes, are high in raffinose, which can contribute to IBS symptoms. Tips for nourishing, protecting, and energizing your brain with seed foods. I encourage everyone to completely avoid all grains and legumes as their health risks far outweigh their benefits. Grains and beans are also high in carbohydrate, so they're potentially unsafe for people with insulin resistance. Nuts and seeds are problematic as well, so I encourage you to explore how these foods affect you. If you don't eat animal foods, you will need to rely on soy and other seed foods for protein. See Chapter 15 for your best options. If you eat soy regularly, your iodine requirements may be higher. Limit soy if you have hypothyroidism. If you include grains and/or legumes in your diet, learn preparation techniques to reduce phytate content and inactivate lectins and other toxins, such as pre-soaking and boiling. If you have gastrointestinal symptoms, limit your intake of legumes and nuts, which are very hard to digest. Rice and spelt are examples of seed foods that are more comfortable to digest. If you don't eat animal foods, the best and only sources of the omega-3s you need are vegan-friendly supplements sourced from algae. If you include some animal foods in your diet, there is no nutritional or health reason to include any seed foods in your diet. I realize it's hard to imagine life without seed foods, particularly grains, which most of us have been eating multiple times a day since early childhood. But the health benefits for your brain and the rest of your body are well worth it. I recognize that my recommendation that you remove grains and legumes from your diet may come across as radical and risky, flying in the face of decades of global health policy and thousands of years of human history. Grains and legumes are trusted and beloved by cultures in all 4 corners of the globe. Countless people around the world live with food insecurity and depend on starchy grains and legumes for their survival. Wheat, rice, and maize together comprise 60% of the world's caloric intake, in some regions by choice, in others by necessity. However, it is important to make a distinction between dietary strategies that ensure the survival of large populations and dietary strategies that optimize the health of your brain and the rest of your body. If you are seeking better mental and physical health, eliminating grains and legumes is the single most important change you can make to your whole foods diet. Chapter 13. Fruits and Vegetables, Distinguishing Friend from Foe. A great many of the chemicals plants produce are designed by natural selection to compel other creatures to leave them alone. But many other of the substances plants make have exactly the opposite effect, drawing other creatures to them by stirring and gratifying their desires. Michael Pollan, The Botany of Desire. Fruits and vegetables have much to offer. They come in a wonderful diversity of shapes, colors, and textures, and lend a delicious complexity of unique flavors to home cooking. Many of them are good sources of several essential vitamins and minerals. Most vegetables that grow above ground are low in carbohydrate, so they are metabolically safe for people with insulin resistance and well suited for ketogenic diets. Yet there are limits to their capabilities, and even a few risks to be aware of. So each fruit and each vegetable must be evaluated on its own merits. Fruits and vegetables are widely viewed as virtuous superfoods, so we're often told that the more of them we eat, the healthier we will be. Packed with vitamins and minerals, bursting with colorful antioxidants, and full of fiber, we imagine them nourishing our souls, steeling us against chronic disease, and sweeping our colons clean. The U.S. Dietary Guidelines advise eating 2 cups of fruit and 2.5 cups of a wide variety of vegetables per day, implying that both fruits and vegetables are necessary and that all of them are equally good for you. This recommendation, and indeed every official proclamation you've ever heard about these foods, from eat the rainbow to get your 5 a day to most of us aren't getting enough fruits and vegetables, is grounded entirely in nutrition epidemiology. This doesn't mean that fruits and vegetables aren't good for you. It just means that if we want to understand how these foods affect our health, we need to start fresh with the facts. What are fruits and vegetables? The words fruits and vegetables are uttered in the same breath so often that you could be forgiven for thinking of them as having similar biological and nutritional effects. Yet nothing could be further from the truth. Some plants want you to eat their fruits, so they go out of their way to make them safe and appealing to you. But no self-respecting plant wants you to eat the rest of its body. So all vegetables, without exception, are trying to hurt you. Whether they succeed and how much harm they might do depends on the type of vegetable, how you prepare it, how much of it you consume, and how strong your defenses are. If it contains seeds, it's a fruit. Fruits are plant ovaries, the core of the plant's reproductive system. Just as human ovaries produce and store eggs, plant ovaries, fruits, produce and store seeds. Unlike human ovaries, fruity ovaries are also responsible for dispersing those seeds and have evolved a variety of clever strategies for accomplishing this task. If a plant requires mammals like us to disperse them, it may wrap its seeds in a sweet, succulent fruit, paint it a pretty color, and dangle it seductively from a tree branch like an apple tree does. When a bear swallows an apple, core and all, the seeds wend their way through her intestines as she moseys about. By the time the seeds exit her digestive tract, she will likely have wandered far from the tree to deposit the seeds onto the ground, complete with a supply of natural fertilizer as a parting gift. Most of the fruits we eat are relatively non-toxic and easy to digest, therefore safe to consume in moderation unless you have insulin resistance or fructose intolerance. More on this shortly. We think of fruits as being sweet, but many are not. For example, cranberry seeds are housed in bitter, dry, featherweight fruits because they prefer to float on water currents in search of greener pastures, and therefore don't need to manipulate us into eating them. Some fruits are even downright poisonous. Just one of many examples is the fruit of the manchineel tree, which grows in Florida, the Caribbean, Mexico, and Central America. Sometimes called the little apple of death, this small green fruit tastes sweet, but contains a caustic toxin that causes blistering ulcers and burns. Some fruits may want you to swallow and transport their seeds, but the last thing any fruit wants is for you to chew and digest their seeds to death. And every seed has its own clever way of trying to avoid this terrifying possibility. Strawberry seeds are too tiny to chew. Tomato seeds are too slippery. Peach pits are rock hard and impenetrable. Watermelon seeds and apple seeds are easy to chew, but so bitter that some animals swallow them whole, while we prefer to spit them out. Smarter still, the flesh of some edible fruits contains sugar alcohols like sorbitol, mannitol, and xylitol, which act as natural laxatives. This is how prune juice works. Sugar alcohols speed seeds through your innards, increasing the chances that they will escape unscathed. If it doesn't contain seeds, it's a vegetable. Any plant part that is not a fruit or a seed is considered a vegetable. Cucumbers and eggplants are technically fruits because they contain seeds, whereas carrot roots, celery stems, and spinach leaves are vegetables. Most of the vegetables we eat are good sources of certain nutrients and low in toxins, but the majority of the world's vegetables are considered inedible because they are too bitter or toxic, which is why we rarely drool at the sight of a pile of yard clippings. For example, botanical surveys conducted in England found that only about 1/4 of the plant species that grow in that country contain edible parts. Plants versus animals, nature's forever war. Traces of fruit and vegetable matter discovered within ancient cooking vessels and inside the bodies of Danish mummies tell us that these foods have been on the human menu for at least 10,000 years, but we have probably been eating fruits and vegetables regularly since the dawn of our species, even if we don't have physical evidence of it. Our closest primate relative, the chimpanzee, eats lots of fruit and some vegetables too, which suggests that we have probably been doing the same ever since our ancestors began evolving away from chimpanzees 7 to 9 million years ago. Several million years of plant-eating experience may seem like enough time to understand them, outsmart them, and safely exploit them for our own nutritional purposes, but plants have been on Earth for hundreds of millions of years, allowing them ample time to perfect their chemical weapons arsenal. To date, more than 50,000 defensive compounds have been identified in the plant kingdom. So our prehistoric ancestors had their work cut out for them. To protect themselves and future generations against plant poisonings, they had to learn the hard way through smell, taste, and experience which plant parts could safely be eaten, and then pass that hard-earned wisdom down through generations. Our bodies have also evolved clever biological coping mechanisms to help us survive the violent plant molecules we regularly encounter. If they hadn't, we wouldn't be able to safely consume most of the plant foods we eat today. Our first line of defense is aversion to bitterness, nature's way of communicating toxicity. Every baby who spits out a Brussels sprout is simply exercising excellent evolutionary instincts. Whereas modern messaging about the health benefits of bitter vegetables such as kale convinces many adults they need to swallow them even though they don't taste good. Many of the fruits and vegetables we eat today have been painstakingly bred to reduce bitterness and or increase sugar content to make them safer and more appetizing to consumers. Our second line of defense is our intestinal lining, which intelligently identifies friend from foe and decides which molecules may cross into the bloodstream and which should keep moving along toward the exit. Any unsavory substances that manage to breach this barrier and enter the bloodstream will immediately encounter our third line of defense, the liver. The largest organ in your body, except for your skin, your liver filters dangerous substances out of your blood, transforms them into harmless waste products, and ships them out of the body, usually through your kidneys and into the urine. Still, if you eat too many of the wrong plant foods, you can overwhelm all of these defenses. Worse still, if you have poor gut, liver, kidney, or immune health, your ability to comfortably tolerate even small amounts of certain plant foods, and in some cases, most or all plant foods, may be compromised. The nutritional quality of fruits and vegetables. We think of fruits and vegetables as being excellent sources of essential vitamins and minerals. But the list of micronutrients this food family can offer you in any significant amount is fairly short. Vitamin C, vitamin K1, vitamin B6, vitamin B9, or folate, potassium, magnesium, manganese, calcium, and carotenoids such as beta-carotene, which we can turn into vitamin A. Other nutrients such as iron can be found in certain fruits and vegetables, but anti-nutrients restrict our access to them. Most fruits and vegetables are high in carbohydrate, low in protein, and very low in fat. Notice that this macronutrient profile is almost exactly the opposite of a ketogenic diet. The exceptions to the low-fat rule are avocados, olives, and palm fruits, which are so high in fat that we can extract and bottle their oils. Note that these oils come from the flesh of these fruits rather than their pits, so they are not seed oils. Since the majority of fruits and vegetables are low in protein and fat, the major macronutrient they have to offer us is carbohydrate. Are carbohydrates good or bad? One of the most striking and important differences between plant and animal foods is that all animal foods, with the exception of milk, are extremely low in carbohydrate, whereas most plant foods are high in carbohydrate. This is because animals store most of their energy as fat, but plants store most of their energy as carbohydrate, usually as underground lumps of starch. Some plants also sweeten their fruits with simple sugars to entice animals to eat them. Therefore, fruits and root vegetables, like potatoes and beets, tend to be particularly rich in carbohydrate. Just because we don't need to eat carbohydrates doesn't necessarily mean carbohydrates are bad. In fact, carbohydrates are so good that our bodies make glucose and glycogen from scratch to nourish our cells, especially our brain cells. As omnivores, we can extract nutrients from both plant and animal foods, and we can burn both carbohydrates and fat for energy. The unrefined sugars and starches naturally present in fruits and roots should not pose any significant danger to your health, so long as you are metabolically healthy. Unfortunately, most of us have accumulated a significant degree of metabolic impairment and can no longer safely tolerate much carbohydrate of any kind, even from fruits and vegetables. If you have insulin resistance or diabetes, the sugars and starches in fruits and starchy vegetables can contribute to high insulin and glucose levels. And if this is happening for you, it will damage your physical and mental health over time. Just as with seed foods, fruits and vegetables contain a variety of sugars and starches, some of which we digest easily down into glucose, and some of which we can't digest at all. Those we can't digest ourselves wind up in the colon, where they are fermented by gut bacteria. fermentable carbohydrates and IBS. Fermentable carbohydrates are also called FODMAPs, fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. We are sometimes advised to seek out foods containing resistant starch and certain other FODMAPs to feed our microbiome. But if you have irritable bowel syndrome or IBS, you may want to limit your FODMAP intake. IBS is common, affecting 10% or more of people in North America, Northern Europe, and Australasia. Symptoms can include constipation, diarrhea, bloating, and/or cramping. And people with IBS are 2 to 3 times more likely to have symptoms of anxiety or depression than people without IBS. We hear all the time that boosting fiber intake by eating more fruits and vegetables is one of the secrets to better digestion. But eating more fruits and vegetables can sometimes cause more problems than it solves because so many of the carbohydrates they contain are indigestible. Study after study finds that when people with IBS follow a low FODMAPs diet, with the guidance of a dietitian, the majority of them feel much better. With the exception of lactose, which comes from milk, all FODMAPs come from plant foods, and the ones most commonly found in fruits and vegetables are raffinose, resistant starch, fructose, fructans, and sugar alcohols. We learned about raffinose in the last chapter when we discussed legumes, but asparagus and cruciferous vegetables, such as broccoli, cabbage, and kale, are also rich in raffinose. As its name suggests, resistant starches are starches that resist being digested by our intestinal enzymes. The few fruits and vegetables that contain resistant starch include plantains, underripe bananas, Jerusalem artichokes, tiger nuts, and cooked cooled potatoes. Fructose is nature's sweetener, so the sweeter a plant food is, the more fructose it contains. We absorb glucose extremely well, but fructose can be harder to absorb, especially if it's not accompanied by an equal amount of glucose. Sweet vegetables tend to have a good balance between glucose and fructose. But some fruits contain a lopsided amount of fructose, including pears, apples, watermelon, cantaloupe, grapes, guava, mango, and papaya. Any fructose in these fruits that isn't absorbed in the upper intestines will continue down to the colon to be fermented. Garlic, onions, shallots, artichokes, and cruciferous vegetables contain fructans, chains of fructose molecules with a glucose molecule tacked on to one end. We can digest and absorb only about 10% of the fructans we consume, so most of them end up fermenting in the colon. Stone fruits like cherries, plums, peaches, apricots, and nectarines contain small amounts of sugar alcohols, which act as natural laxatives. If you overeat these fruits or eat them dried, which concentrates the sugar alcohols, you may experience diarrhea and related symptoms. Pulp fiction, the fiber fallacy. It is widely believed that the fiber content of fruits and vegetables is key to their health benefits. So, what is fiber, and how does it protect us from disease? Just as bones and cartilage support the bodies of animals, fiber provides architectural scaffolding for plants. There are 2 types of fiber, soluble and insoluble. And all plant foods contain a combination of both in varying amounts. We're told that soluble fiber is good for us because it slows things down, and that insoluble fiber is good for us because it speeds things up. Not only are these mixed messages confusing, but they suggest that our gastrointestinal system can't be trusted to regulate its own behavior. Insoluble fiber, the tough stuff. My grandmother used to affectionately refer to insoluble fiber as roughage. Insoluble fiber can't absorb water. It's the type of fiber that makes asparagus and celery stalks so tough and stringy. Insoluble fiber passes through our digestive system virtually unchanged because even our colon bacteria struggle to ferment it. We're told insoluble fiber is good for us because it adds weighty bulk to the contents of our intestines, helping to push things along. But if you suffer from constipation, adding more indigestible material to an already clogged system can actually make the situation worse. We're told that insoluble fiber sweeps our innards clean of potential toxins. But there is no evidence that the colon needs any help keeping itself clean. And you don't need fiber to keep things moving because the muscles that encircle your intestines are constantly in motion, rhythmically propelling everything you swallow toward the exit. You also don't need fiber to scrub your intestinal walls because the interior lining of your intestines completely replaces itself twice a week. In fact, that scrubbing action could do more harm than good, as insoluble fiber can be so abrasive that the cells lining the colon are forced to produce a layer of mucus to shield themselves from damage. Soluble fiber, the swell gel. Soluble fiber absorbs liquid, causing it to partially dissolve and form a gel. You can see this happen before your very eyes by stirring a soluble fiber supplement such as Metamucil into a glass of water. The ability of soluble fiber to hold water is what allows fruits like apples to be juicy while maintaining their firm shape. There are 3 main reasons we are advised to consume soluble fiber. 1. Soluble fiber lowers cholesterol. Some of the cholesterol you eat becomes physically trapped within soluble fiber. Like bits of fruit cocktails suspended deep within a gelatin mold, these cholesterol molecules can't make contact with your intestinal lining, so they can't be absorbed, reducing the amount of cholesterol that enters your bloodstream. However, in Chapter 4, we learned that cholesterol is not a toxin, it's a nutrient. Your body wisely decides how much cholesterol you should absorb. It doesn't need any assistance, or rather interference, from fiber. 2. Soluble fiber can soften blood sugar spikes. Yes, this swollen gel slows digestion down, which can reduce blood sugar highs by 10 to 20%. But if your blood glucose is spiking to unhealthy levels, you don't need to eat more fiber. You need to eat less sugar. Instead of increasing fiber to dampen sugar spikes, you can prevent sugar spikes altogether by removing the types of carbohydrate that cause them in the first place. 3. Soluble fiber helps you lose weight. This type of fiber swells in the gut, slowing digestion and helping you feel fuller, so you may eat less. It also traps some food particles and prevents them from being digested, reducing the number of calories you absorb. Clinical trials of soluble fiber and weight loss, however, have been mixed. Does the microbiome need fiber? When you eat, you're not just eating for one. You're also eating for the nearly 40 trillion bacteria that live in your gut. Even though we can't digest and absorb fiber for our own nourishment, we are often advised to eat it for the sake of our microbiome. Different types of bacteria prefer different foods. So, if you eat something a particular species of bacteria likes to eat, that species will flourish and multiply. Certain colon bacteria happen to enjoy fermenting soluble fiber, and one of the molecules they produce in the process is a short-chain fatty acid called butyrate. Butyrate nourishes colon cells and protects them against inflammation, leading many microbiome scientists to believe that soluble fiber is essential to good gut health. Does this mean that if you remove soluble fiber from your diet, your colon cells will suffer? Probably not. First of all, soluble fiber isn't the only thing that stimulates gut bacteria to make butyrate. Some bacteria can turn amino acids into butyrate. Secondly, butyrate isn't the only molecule capable of nourishing and protecting your colon cells. Butyrate molecules are almost identical to beta-hydroxybutyrate molecules, ketones. Ketones are an excellent fuel source for colon cells and have even more potent anti-inflammatory properties than butyrate. So if you are in ketosis, your colon cells will be well fed and well protected by circulating ketones whether you are eating soluble fiber or not. Fiber and the gut-brain connection. The idea that there is a mysterious megacity of microfauna living inside of us that helps digest our food, protect our gut lining, regulate our immune system, and communicate with our brains has captivated our imagination. And what scientists have already discovered is fascinating. We know that your gut microbiome and your brain communicate with each other directly via the vagus nerve, the large nerve that connects your brain with your abdominal organs. They also communicate indirectly via chemical messenger molecules that travel through your bloodstream. We also know that when you change your diet, the number and type of bacteria living in your intestines will change rapidly, usually within 24 hours or less. So it's a very dynamic and responsive system. However, as compelling as it is to imagine that we might be able to control our moods by controlling this symbiotic swarm, it's important to keep in mind that the microbiome has trillions of microscopic minds of its own, so it's difficult to steer it in any one particular direction. In 2022, a team of researchers reviewed the existing research on food, the brain-gut microbiome system, and a selected group of psychiatric disorders, including autism spectrum disorder, depression, and cognitive decline, and concluded, to date, there is insufficient evidence from mechanistic human studies to make conclusions about causality between a specific diet and microbially mediated brain function. Translation: scientists don't yet understand how the foods you eat affect your microbiome, your brain, or your risk for neuropsychiatric disorders. Unfortunately, this exciting field is still so young that it can't yet tell us how to eat to improve the health of our inner inhabitants, let alone how our food choices affect the relationship between microbiome health and brain health. So, in the meantime, trust your gut. Good digestion shouldn't hurt. If a particular high-fiber food doesn't agree with you, there is no evidence that avoiding that food will endanger your health. Fruit and vegetable toxins of most concern. Because we are taught to view all fruits and vegetables as innocent and even virtuous, if we don't feel well, we tend not to suspect them as possible culprits. In fact, many people even double down on their intake of fruits and vegetables in an attempt to feel better, not realizing that this strategy could, in some cases, backfire. By now, you know that all vegetables, and a few fruits, contain defensive chemicals that could potentially harm you. It's not my intent to scare everyone away from eating vegetables entirely. Most people tolerate a variety of vegetables quite well. My goal is to raise your awareness and encourage you to keep a curious and open mind when it comes to these foods, just in case some of them may be secretly sabotaging your good faith efforts to optimize your health. In other words, if you are having mental or physical health issues, rather than giving all fruits and vegetables the benefit of the doubt, include them on your list of suspects. A complete discussion of all plant food toxins is beyond the scope of this book, so we'll focus here on the fruits and vegetables most likely to jeopardize mental health. Nightshades contain neurotoxins. Introducing the edible nightshades, genus Solanaceae. The Solanum family. Tomatoes, tomatillos, eggplant, potatoes, of all types except for sweet potatoes and yams, and garden huckleberries. The capsicum family, peppers, including bell peppers, chili peppers, jalapenos, pimentos, pepperoncini, paprika, cayenne, and Tabasco. The lycium family, goji berries and wolfberries. At first glance, many of these foods look completely unrelated to each other. But look closely and you'll notice the family resemblance. All nightshade fruits wear the same jaunty little green elfish hat. Potatoes don't sport these hats, but the fruits of potato plants do. Nightshade foods are not to be confused with deadly nightshade and its poisonous relatives, which belong to a different branch of the nightshade family tree. Nightshades produce glycoalkaloids, pesticides that defend against bacteria, fungi, viruses, and insects. Glycoalkaloids are membrane disruptors. Like tiny hand grenades, glycoalkaloids attack the cholesterol within membranes, causing cells to leak or even burst open on contact. Glycoalkaloids are also neurotoxins that work exactly the same way nerve gas does, by blocking cholinesterase, the enzyme responsible for breaking down acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that carries signals between nerve cells and muscle cells. With this enzyme blocked, acetylcholine accumulates in synapses and overstimulates muscle cells, which, depending on the type and dosage of the glycoalkaloid, could lead to seizures, paralysis, respiratory arrest, and even death. Glycoalkaloids also cross the blood-brain barrier, where they can influence the alertness, attention, and memory circuits that rely on acetylcholine. Potato glycoalkaloids are highly toxic and can reach dangerous levels in sprouting, green, rotting, damaged, or unripe potatoes. Well-documented outbreaks of potato-related glycoalkaloid poisoning in school children have led to serious symptoms such as vomiting, fever, diarrhea, and several instances of coma, along with multiple psychiatric symptoms, including extreme restlessness, confusion, and even hallucinations. Eggplant can also contain significant quantities of glycoalkaloid, and the more bitter the eggplant, the more glycoalkaloid it contains. Green tomatoes are chock full of glycoalkaloids, but levels drop dramatically as they mature in the sun, so ripe red tomatoes contain only very small quantities. Levels in peppers are also quite low, and goji berries contain only trace amounts. Even so, a few of my nightshade-sensitive patients react poorly to these fruits. Glycoalkaloids are hardy and survive most cooking and processing methods, so the only way to reduce your exposure is to avoid them. Since potato glycoalkaloids are located in the skin, peeling potatoes and removing any greenish areas, eyes, which are budding sprouts, and damaged areas removes virtually all of their glycoalkaloid content, whereas eggplant glycoalkaloids are located mainly in the seeds and flesh, so peeling doesn't help. Glycoalkaloids are absorbed into the circulation and can take many days to clear, so if you consume too many nightshade foods too frequently, glycoalkaloids may accumulate in your system over time. Peppers of all kinds contain capsaicinoids in and around their seeds to protect them from insects, parasites, and molds. Their sharp taste is also supposed to prevent mammals like us from eating them, but most humans quite enjoy their spiciness. The most familiar member of this fiery family is capsaicin, the active ingredient in pepper spray and pain relief creams. Outside the brain, capsaicinoids bind to pain receptors on nerve endings, generating a temporary burning sensation, followed by a long period of numbness. These peppery molecules can also cross the blood-brain barrier and become concentrated in the brain and spinal cord. Studies in animals generally find that reasonable amounts of capsaicin are non-toxic, but when consumed too frequently or given in large doses, capsaicin can cause seizures and can even kill neurons by destroying their mitochondria. Most clinical research focuses on capsaicin's potential health benefits rather than its potential risks. But extreme exposure situations in the real world, such as spicy food eating competitions and overdoses in children, have led to severe pain, nausea, vomiting, high blood pressure, heart attacks, and several deaths. Several of my more sensitive patients report burning sensations, most often in the soles of the feet, heartburn, and irritability after eating nightshades of any kind, although peppers seem to bring on the most severe episodes. Hot peppers are central to many cuisines around the world, and it is possible that most people tolerate them relatively well. But if you have a mental health concern of any kind, I would encourage you to experiment with a nightshade-free diet to be absolutely sure that these foods aren't preventing you from feeling your best. Nightshades also contain lectins. The only fruits and vegetables that contain significant quantities of lectins are the nightshades, giving you one more reason to consider avoiding them. You can minimize your exposure by boiling nightshades before you eat them, or by peeling them and removing their seeds, because lectins are located primarily in their skins and seeds. Cassava produces cyanide. Cassava root is a hardy underground vegetable that comes in both bitter and sweet varieties. The sweet variety is the main ingredient in tapioca, and flour made from sweet cassava is becoming increasingly popular as a gluten-free alternative to wheat flour, so you may have noticed new products like cassava chips making an appearance on the shelves of your local health food store. More importantly, sweet cassava is a staple food for hundreds of millions of people in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean. Unfortunately, like the flax seeds we examined in the previous chapter, fresh cassava root contains linamarin, which turns into cyanide when the root is damaged or chewed. And even sweet cassava contains much higher quantities of linamarin than flax seeds, so cassava root must never be consumed raw. To make matters worse, in the process of trying to protect itself, your body converts cyanide into thiocyanate, because thiocyanate is far less toxic than cyanide and easier for your body to eliminate. However, thiocyanate interferes with your thyroid gland's ability to make thyroid hormone. So cassava is both a mitochondrial poison and a goitrogen. The WHO considers foods containing cyanide concentrations of up to 10 parts per million safe to consume. However, fresh sweet cassava root can contain up to 100 parts per million. And while peeling and boiling can reduce its cyanide content, it does not remove it completely. In fact, most methods aimed at detoxifying cassava, including cooking, sun-drying, grinding, and fermentation, are incomplete and unreliable. If you're wondering how much cyanide might be lurking within those trendy new cassava products in your health food store's snack aisle, you'll be pleased to know that scientists at Australia's Monash University went to the trouble of measuring the cyanide content of 21 cassava-based products purchased from markets in the Melbourne area. Highly processed tapioca-based products, such as chips and flours, contained negligible levels of cyanide, as did all cassava chips manufactured in Australia. However, all cassava chips imported from other countries contained cyanide quantities well above the 10 parts per million limit. On average, imported cassava chips contained 96 parts per million of cyanide, with one brand containing 148 parts per million. Some countries, including Australia and New Zealand, have officially adopted the 10 parts per million limit for cassava products, while others have not. So the amount of cyanide in products in your local area will depend partly on your government's regulations. While most cassava consumed around the world is of the sweet variety, there are still some places where people resort to bitter cassava to help sustain themselves. Bitter cassava contains up to 2,000 parts per million of cyanide and is therefore extremely toxic. Outbreaks of cyanide poisoning caused by bitter cassava have occurred from time to time. In 2017, the Centers for Disease Control reported an outbreak in Uganda, where cassava is a staple crop for 57% of the population, that affected 98 people. 33 were hospitalized and 2 people died. Heavy reliance on bitter cassava in some areas of sub-Saharan Africa is causing devastating neurodevelopmental, psychiatric, and neurodegenerative diseases with serious irreversible symptoms, including cognitive impairment and paralysis. If you have a choice, I strongly recommend you completely avoid all cassava products, whether bitter or sweet. Cruciferous vegetables can interfere with thyroid function. Cruciferous vegetables such as broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and kale come in so many varieties that they tend to dominate the produce aisle. Refer to Chapter 17 for a complete list. When cut, bruised, or chewed, crucifers produce natural pesticides called isothiocyanates they can use to attack and kill bacteria, fungi, insects, and worms. These same molecules also behave as goitrogens, which interfere with your ability to make thyroid hormone, although their antithyroid effects are considerably weaker than those of soy and millet. Of the crucifers that have been tested, those with the strongest antithyroid activity include Brussels sprouts, collard greens, and Russian or Siberian kale. Cooking crucifers will reduce your exposure to their goitrogens, so most cruciferous vegetables are unlikely to cause thyroid problems unless you consume them raw and in large quantities. Nevertheless, if you have hypothyroidism or iodine deficiency, limiting your exposure may be wise. Miscellaneous toxins and anti-nutrients. There are many other risky chemicals lurking within fruits and vegetables. In your accompanying PDF, you'll find a table describing the health effects of oxalates, tannins, coumarins, salicylates, thiosulfonates, saponins, and cucurbitacins. Fortunately, these miscellaneous substances are less likely to cause significant problems unless you consume them in great quantities or are prone to sensitivities. If this topic feels overwhelming or confusing, don't worry. I've boiled fruits and vegetables down into a special list of what I call the kinder, gentler plant foods, which you'll find in the Quiet Paleo Food List in Chapter 17. Every recipe in this book is designed around that list so you can feel what it's like to eat in a quieter way. Know your way around the rainbow. Some fruits and vegetables are good sources of vitamin C, vitamin K1, vitamin B6, vitamin B9, potassium, magnesium, manganese, calcium, and/or beta-carotene. Many people tolerate a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, while others are more sensitive. Some fruits and vegetables are high in FODMAPs, which can contribute to IBS symptoms. All fruits and vegetables contain defensive chemicals, but the ones of most concern are nightshades, which contain neurotoxins and lectins, cassava, which produces cyanide, and cruciferous vegetables, which have antithyroid properties. Tips for nourishing, protecting, and energizing your brain with fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables highest in nutrients include cruciferous vegetables, dark green leafy vegetables, beets, avocado, pumpkin, and butternut squash. Vegetables lowest in nutrients include iceberg lettuce, celery, cucumbers, radishes, and white potatoes. Most sweet fruits are non-toxic and easy to digest, so you can enjoy them in moderation as part of a healthy diet, unless you have insulin resistance. Sweet fruits and starchy vegetables are high in carbohydrate, so if you have insulin resistance, you may need to focus on non-starchy vegetables and low-sugar fruits to keep your blood sugar and insulin levels in a healthy range. If you have digestive issues, eating more fruits and vegetables than your system can process could cause more gut health problems than it solves. Cooking, limiting portion sizes, and sticking with lower FODMAP choices can all improve digestibility. Avoid cassava and nightshades and go easy on raw cruciferous vegetables. Cooking reduces many toxins, but some nutrients, especially the B vitamins and vitamin C, are destroyed by heat or leach out into boiling water. Fruits and vegetables can be delicious, nutritious components of a healthy diet, but pay close attention to how these foods affect you. We know far too little about any negative effects they may have on mental and physical health because most clinical studies in humans downplay, ignore, or deny their risks, choosing to focus on the potential benefits of this food group. Strong beliefs about the health benefits of eating the rainbow can influence not only the hypotheses that researchers choose to test in clinical trials, but also how we interpret their findings. This phenomenon is one of the forces responsible for the rise of the superfood.